All right, welcome back to our awesome pediatric practice management pod video media cast. I think we're up to
I like that name better. Awesome Pediatric Podcast. That's much better than our other one.
Yeah. Or either that, it's fabulous. It's a fabulous media cast. We are at episode 8. I'm here with Brandon. Brandon, say hello.
Hello there, Mr. Hart. How's it going? Hello there, interwebs.
Yeah, our last episode got a few hundred downloads, so we've got more and more people watching and listening.
Did you, you have a guest on or something like that? How did that happen?
No, actually, there wasn't a guest. That was 2 episodes ago, and that was when we had Paul Vincieri, and that actually was one of the first big jump ups that we had.
No, I figured because I don't think you and I could have pulled in that many, so I thought, well, sure, maybe somebody else recorded the podcast.
Nah, I think our topic relating to pediatric practice management benchmarks was really quite popular. Though, I've been looking at this stuff, and we've got some very interesting topics that attract more attention than others, and so I'm going to continue my appeal to anybody who's listening. If there's a topic you want us to cover, tell us about it. And in fact, at the next episode that we do, we are going to cover a fan request. We're going to talk about marketing your practice.
Yeah.
Today,
actually, I know that the benchmarking was very popular, and I was hoping that we can do that again today, and talk a little bit about some other things that you look at when you're assessing an office. Because certainly, we talked about the revenue per visit, and you showed us that graph or that chart. But my guess is that there are other things that you look at. So if you want to, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about some of the other things that you look at and ask you some questions about that. What do you say?
Yeah, I can do 20 episodes straight on practice management benchmarking, but I'm glad to talk about the key ones, the ones I look at first. That's
right. Well, so we talked about the revenue, and in that chart, that actually gave a little bit more than just the revenue. So what would you say is the next thing that you look at? And by the way, if you don't know what we're talking about, go to the episode number 7 and take a look at them, because that was an awesome podcast.
Well, the next thing I like to look at, and I want to be clear, every practice is different. I find different things when I go to visit each practice, but there are some things I like to do just out of the gate. And the best analogy I can give is what it must be like to be a physician seeing a patient for the first time. You got to get those vitals, and you've got to get a little history. And if you look at certain benchmarks, that's what they can do for you. And even though they don't tell the whole story, it gives me a starting place. It starts letting me frame the challenges that the practice is facing, so I can get my head around it. The next 2 things I look for, after I look for revenue per visit, the next 2 things I look for are the E&M distribution and the sick to well visit ratio. They both describe very different things. They both have different clues or secrets that they allow me to see about the practice. And I also like them because they are both very easily measured. I've got much more complex
of course.
Data that I look at, but this is stuff I can ask any practice to get.
So I got a call yesterday, actually. Visits, so what codes exactly are those?
Okay, so for the E&M visits, when I'm looking at the distribution of E&M visits, which is a classic consulting data element, I'm only looking at 4 codes. Okay, I'm holding my fingers up here. 4 codes, and that's specific, or that's for a specific reason. I'm looking at the 99212, the 99213, the 99214, and the 99215. You'll note I am not looking at the 99211, and this is one of the, funny little, I don't want to call it myths, but misperceptions of how you should look at your E&M distribution that continues to this day. I've never understood it. When I first started learning about the E&M distribution, all the graphs and examples I got, including the ones from the AAP, showed a curve or showed a graph or showed data for the 99211 through the 99215, and the concept was that the distribution is what's known as an even distribution, or a normal distribution, pardon me, where the central value, the 99213, was expected to have the most volume, And then the 99212s and 214s were supposed to have about the same amount of volume. And then the 211s and 215s would have the same amount of volume. They were appearing equidistantly from the median, and then therefore should be approximately equal. The problem with that premise, besides the fact that it doesn't reflect reality, is that physicians aren't supposed to do 99211s. So why in the first place would we even include them in the measurement? Really, when you're looking at the E&M distribution for a practicing pediatrician, it should be 99212 through 215. And if it is in fact a normal distribution, which I suggest that it isn't, but even if it were, the suggestion would then be that your 212s and 215s would be about the same amount, and your 213s and 214s would be about the same amount.
So you're saying that by removing the 211, then now the 214 really is the middle.
Well, between the 213 and the 214 becomes the middle. Those two.
I'm saying that it shifts over just a little bit as opposed to that distribution that you were describing just a minute ago.
That's exactly right, and that's the first thing that by making it proper, by eliminating a code that a pediatrician should never use. Okay, not the practice.
There's a much better reality of what's going on. Now, I have a ton of questions about the 99211 in terms, but this isn't a billing one on why perhaps a doctor might think that a 99211 would be permissible. So, but I'm not going to spend time on that. So let's focus then on the 212 and then all the way to 215 then. So you take a picture of this, and what does that tell you then? You have the number of how many 212s you have versus 215, and so what does this tell you exactly?
Okay, the first thing that, well, let me go a little bit further with the way I generate the final number, and then I'll tell you what I do with it. Most of the time, historically, and if you Google E&M distribution, okay, or you look at the AAP, the AAFP, any of the primary care sites, they'll give you some sense of what some people think that distribution should be. One of the problems that you run into pretty quickly, though, is that it is not a simple number. It's a benchmark in its truest form is usually just a single digit. And if you run into a practice that's got, let's say, 40% 212s and 40% 215s and 10% 213s and 10% 214s, does that practice overcode or undercode? The answer is both. It's hard to say. And so what I like to do for simplicity's sake, and this doesn't give you the full understanding of the practice, but it makes a really fast comparison, is I simply do this. I add up all the 212s through 215s, and that creates my denominator. I then add up only the 214s and 215s, and I make that my numerator. So it's what I'm looking for technically is the percentage of 214s and 215s relative to all of the E&Ms that I do.
Okay. Yep.
All right, and it gives me a single number. Now, there are certainly exceptions. There's some substantial exceptions, but by and large, that number is incredibly effective at telling me a variety of things. It tells me about the coding knowledge and understanding of the practice in question. It gives me some sense of potential lost income that a practice may have. It can sometimes give me the sense of needing to go dig into their charts right away because I get concerned if someone's E&M distribution is too high. One of the first things I like to do is go take a look at the charts and make sure those are substantiated. And I also know that if somebody's benchmark is too far north or too far south, that they are probably not managing themselves well. So let me give you the value that I usually find, and then let me tell you, I'll give you examples of the sort of thing that happens when I run into people who are at opposite ends of the scale. So right now, for PCC clients, that number, the number of 214s and 215s as relative to their E&M distribution has increased substantially. It's almost doubled, a little bit less, but it's almost doubled in the last 10 years. And it's gone from about 12 to 14% to 28 to 30%. Okay? And the reason for that is multifold. I think people are doing a better job coding. I think they use more automated systems, whether that's on paper or an EMR. And I think they're doing more well visits, which we'll get to later today, which naturally leads to a higher distribution of E&M visits because you have fewer people coming in for the low-end sick visits. And so what I like to do is I don't want to say I like to see this, but when I go to a practice and I measure their E&M distribution and I see that their 214s and 215s make up 10 to 15% of the work that they do, the first thing I know is that they are probably leaving somewhere between $10,000 and $25,000 per doctor per year on the table. Okay, so that's rule number one. If you are in the 10 to 15% zone of 214s and 215s, you are probably losing $10 to $15 to $20 to $25,000 a year per doctor, depending on your volume. And I want to be clear: you're losing that money. You're not giving it back to your patients. You're not being more fair and more friendly.
You're already working for it. You're already working for it. So
all you've done,
yeah, I know what you're saying. So
yeah,
you're
letting the vice president of Aetna and U.S. Healthcare or United Healthcare buy a bigger Lexus. That's all you're doing. That's the only person you're helping.
Hey Chip, I want to move really quick onto the sick to wellness ratio, and then we can perhaps talk a little bit more about what each one of these things tells us on the other side of the podcast.
Okay.
So okay, we talked about E&M distribution, and you already told us, to take out the 99211s, and then to do a percentage or a ratio with respect to all the visits from 2 to 5, and then have a little bit better what the distribution is. Mm-hmm. And then what are some of the things that tells you what those numbers are? Of course, it doesn't paint the full picture, but at least is maybe like a roadmap or some suggestions in terms of areas that you can start digging in deeper, correct? Is that a very good assessment?
That's absolutely correct. And in the second half of the podcast, I'll give you some real-life examples of things I've run into.
So now you also mentioned the sick to wellness ratio. So this is obviously all the sick visit compared to all the wellness visits, right? So
that's correct.
All those 99212s and 5s that you talked about, and we obviously take all the wellness codes. So do you take the new patients as well, or are we talking just established, or does it matter?
Actually, I do take the well patients just to be a completist.
No, I'm talking about the new.
Yeah, I take the new as well.
The new or the established?
I take both. I add them together. I take all the new visit, all the well visit codes, the 99381s through 385s, and the 99391s through 395s. Okay, that's on one side of my equation. And then I take all the 99211s. I do take the 211s through 215s, and the 201s through 205s, and I put them on the other side of the equation, and I compare the two. And I do put the 211s in there because this measure is not something that's it tends not to be very physician driven. It can be, certainly, but it's not a coding decision made by the physician. It's actually generally a scheduling decision made by the practice. There are exceptions to that. But it ends up giving me a sense of how much attention the practice pays to preventive care. Now, let me add one more caveat, because I get this question asked a lot. What happens when a patient comes in and it's for a well visit and a sick visit code is added at the same time? A patient comes in for a 5-year-old physical and there's otitis at the same time, and so a 213 with a 25 modifier is added to it. When that happens, I don't count that sick code because really that patient came in for the well visit.
Okay.
Okay. And sort of philosophically, when in doubt, I suppose it happens that someone could come in for a sick visit and you end up giving them a well visit instead. I would still count that as a well visit. It doesn't happen that much that it affects the data. But really what we're looking at here is what is the preventive care focus of this practice? And
now, preventive care, but doesn't preventive care sounds like so much work at the Chip? You got the cost of vaccines, you have hemoglobin, urine analysis, vision screen. You have all this work. Does it really pan out for the practice? Is it really that much better? Like, why is preventative so important? We're talking business here. We know that aside from the clinical issue, I mean, it seems to me that I can do runny noses all day, straight in, straight out, or a few OTs, like you said, OMs, I should say, and bang those out really quick. So talk to me a little bit about that difference.
Well, we will do a full podcast about this subject in particular someday soon, but let me make it, I'll hit a couple of the key items why you want to focus on preventive care. Number one, it's the right thing to do, okay? Doing the work that you do for your patients for preventive care, those well visits are pediatricians' unique competency. that your patients can't go to the immediate health cares and the RBCs and everything like that to go get their well visits. That's something only a pediatrician can do. And every pediatrician I know who's been in practice for more than 2 weeks, I mean, you know this from your wife. How many times have they spotted a kid with a developmental issue or a hearing issue or a vision issue that if the patient hadn't come in for a well visit, might have gone on for another couple of years? I have friends whose kids, because they don't believe in doctors, whose kids had vision stuff spotted at school, and that saddens me, and that's just because those kids were not going in for their well visits. So that's one of many reasons. Another reason is that well visits pay a lot more than sick visits. Well visits pay a lot more than sick visits. On average,
where are you getting this stuff here?
I have this data. You know that it's at least on average 2 to 1, and in fact.
And that's what I wanted you to get at, by the way. Those are called lead-in questions, if anybody's listening. Yeah. So we're getting better at this. We're getting better at this.
Otherwise, I'd be picking on Brandon because I would be very disappointed if he didn't know this stuff. But the bottom line is, well visits pay on average 2 to 1, even after adjusting for immunization product. Okay, yeah. With those admins are, and I hope no one outside of pediatrics is listening to this. Those admins are worth a fortune. Okay, for most people. But here's one big one. Here's one giant one.
Wait. Let's rephrase that just in case. Those admin codes have been properly adjusted to reflect the work that goes in there.
Well, to be 100% clear, so many people are losing money on the product code that without the admin codes, it would not be worth giving the shots for pediatricians. They would literally be paying their patients to give shots. I mean,
all right. That's what I want to do. Wait 1 second before we move on. I want to go ahead and conclude the video portion of this podcast, and then we'll continue on for just another few minutes, Chip. We don't have too much time on going in a little bit deeper on the in and visited and the sick to wellness routes. Okay.
Sure. All right. So now to the podcast.
Yes.
All right.